January wind cut through Buffalo like a blade, the kind of cold that didn't just chill, it killed. Through frosted windows of his black Mercedes, James Morrison watched the world in shades of white and gray. 62 years old, $400 million, 13 empty bedrooms in a mansion he couldn't call home. Thomas slowed the car without being asked. On the corner where Elmwood met Delaware Park, a small figure stood in bitter cold. A child, maybe 6, blonde hair escaping a thin knit cap, pink coat too small, wrists exposed to killing air. Beside her, a bicycle covered in frost. In her frozen hands, a cardboard sign. James's throat tightened as he read the words written in what looked like lipstick. For sale, $20. Please help Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days. Behind the child, barely visible through snow-heavy branches, a woman slumped against an oak tree, not moving. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 25 years ago, James Morrison had been poor. The kind of poor where you pawn your mother's wedding ring for your father's heart medication, where you work 3 jobs and still watch the woman you love die because you can't afford the treatment that might have saved her. Margaret, his wife, gone at 29, a year after their wedding. Breast cancer that could have been caught earlier with better insurance. Could have been treated if they'd had money for the experimental therapy the doctor mentioned once, then never again. James had made a promise over her grave. No one he could help would ever die for lack of money. He'd climbed from nothing to everything, building Morrison Tech Solutions from a basement startup to an empire that powered half the Fortune 500. Every dollar was a brick in the wall between him and that helpless feeling of watching someone slip away. But somewhere in the climbing, he'd stopped seeing people, stopped feeling. The money that was supposed to prevent suffering became insulation from it. His mansion had 13 bedrooms, 1 for every year since Margaret died, and he slept alone in all of them. His son Marcus lived in Seattle. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. The last conversation had been brief. "Dad, I don't want your money. I wanted a father." Now, at 62, James existed in a temperature-controlled bubble. Thomas Wright, his chauffeur of 20 years, drove him through the city like a submarine through an ocean, present in the water but separate from it. Robert Hayes, his attorney, handled complications. William Bennett, his CFO, managed numbers. Everyone had a function. Nothing required feeling. Until this moment. The child on the corner shouldn't have registered differently than the dozens of homeless people he passed daily, but something about her careful handwriting, the precision of her desperation. The bicycle, pink with white basket and training wheels, that represented childhood being liquidated for survival. And that sign, $20, not 100, not 50. $20 stood between this child and catastrophe. Thomas's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. In 20 years, James had never seen that. "Sir," Thomas said quietly. His voice carried weight it rarely held. "My daughter died 3 years ago. Froze to death. This corner. This week." The words fell like stones into still water. "Pull over," James said. "Sir?" "Pull over. Now." The Mercedes eased to the curb. Through the window, James could see the child's lips had a bluish tint. Her fingers, holding the sign, weren't shaking anymore. That was worse. When you stopped shaking in cold like this, it meant your body was giving up. James reached for the door handle. For the first time in 25 years, he was about to feel something. The cold hit James like a physical blow the moment he stepped from the Mercedes. Even through his $3,000 Armani overcoat and cashmere scarf, the -10-degree air found skin and punished it. Behind him, car doors opened. Thomas, Robert, William, all emerging without discussion, moving with purpose born from something beyond employment. James approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. Up close, she was heartbreakingly small. 6 years old, maybe 7 at most. Her pink coat was worn thin at the elbows, and he could see now that the sleeves were too short by several inches. She wore no gloves. Her small hands, clutching the cardboard sign, were red and raw. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They held something no child's eyes should contain: exhaustion. The kind that comes not from missing a nap, but from carrying burdens meant for adults. James knelt in the snow, not caring that the wet cold soaked through his suit pants. The child watched him with careful wariness, like a feral cat deciding whether to run or stay. "Hi there," he said gently. "My name is James. What's yours?" The child's teeth chattered as she spoke. "Sophie. Sophie Walsh." "Sophie." He kept his voice soft, warm as he could make it. "That's a beautiful name. Sophie, where's your mother?" The little girl's hand rose, trembling, pointing toward the tree line at the edge of the park. James's gaze followed. Through the snow-laden branches, perhaps 30 yards away, he saw her. A woman slumped against an oak tree, wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket. Completely still. His blood turned to ice that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How long has she been there, Sophie?" "Since this morning." The child's voice was barely audible. "She said she was just tired, but she won't wake up now. I tried really hard." Behind James, Thomas was already running toward the tree. Robert had his phone out, dialing 911. William grabbed emergency blankets from the Mercedes trunk. James hadn't even known they kept those. James forced himself to focus on the child in front of him, even as every instinct screamed to run to the woman under the tree. Sophie needed him here, now. "Sophie, honey, we're going to help your mom, but I need you to tell me what happened. Can you do that?" She nodded, and the story came out in broken fragments between chattering teeth. Her mother's name was Elizabeth Beth Walsh. She'd worked as a data analyst at some company called Blackwell Industries. Good job. They'd had an apartment, food, heat. Sophie remembered being warm. Then 3 months ago, her mother was fired. Sophie didn't understand why. Her mother had cried that night, which scared Sophie because she'd never seen her mother cry before. The apartment went away. Then their car was taken by men while Sophie was at school. Her mother had tried to explain about repossession, but Sophie didn't really understand that word. They'd stayed in shelters for a while, but the shelters filled up. Winter brought more people who needed beds. For the last week, they'd been sleeping in an abandoned house with broken windows. No heat, no water. Sophie's mother had given her all the food they had. This morning, her mother had said, "Sophie, baby, I need you to be very brave. Take your bicycle to the nice neighborhood. Someone there will help. I'm going to rest here. I'm just so tired. Come back when you get the money and we'll buy food." Sophie had pedaled for 2 hours through the snow. Her mother had never woken up. The sirens were approaching now, growing louder. Thomas had reached the woman and was checking for a pulse. Even from this distance, James could see the slump of Thomas's shoulders. Relief. He was finding a pulse. James looked at the bicycle beside Sophie. Pink with a white basket and training wheels still attached. Worth maybe $50 in good condition. She was selling it for $20. Something inside him cracked. Not broke, cracked, like ice beginning to thaw after a long freeze. He reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet, extracted several $100 bills, placed them in Sophie's frozen hand, and gently closed her fingers around them. "Keep the bike, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't accessed in decades. "Your mom is going to need it when she feels better, so you can ride together." Sophie looked at the money, then at him, confusion and hope warring on her small face. The ambulance screamed around the corner, lights painting the snow red and blue. James lifted Sophie into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "Let's go see your mom," he said. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, their movements sharp against the white landscape. James stood back, still holding Sophie, as they assessed Beth Walsh's condition. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with gray streaking her dark hair, called out numbers that meant nothing to James but clearly meant everything to her team. Core temperature 89 degrees, BP 60/40, severe dehydration, possible hypothermia-induced cardiac complications. She looked up at James, her expression grave. "Sir, if you'd found her an hour later, maybe less, we'd be calling the coroner instead of the hospital." Sophie made a small sound against James's shoulder. He held her tighter. They loaded Beth onto a stretcher. As the paramedics lifted the blanket to replace it with thermal wraps, James saw what it actually was, fabric in a pattern he recognized. A wedding dress, cut into pieces and sewn roughly back together. The last symbol of hope, destroyed and repurposed for survival. "I'm riding with her," James said. It wasn't a question. The lead paramedic started to protest, family only. But something in James's expression stopped her. She nodded. "The girl, too?" "The girl, too." In the ambulance, Sophie sat pressed against James's side while paramedics worked on her mother. Beth Walsh was younger than James had expected, maybe mid-30s. Her face, gray with cold and deprivation, might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Her breathing was shallow, labored. An oxygen mask covered her nose and mouth. IVs fed into both arms. Sophie reached out once, trying to touch her mother's hand, but a paramedic gently redirected her. "Let us work, sweetie. Your mom needs all the help we can give her right now." At the hospital, everything accelerated into controlled chaos. Beth was rushed to the ICU. A nurse tried to direct Sophie to the waiting area, but the child's grip on James's hand was iron tight. He saw the nurse's eyes take in his expensive coat, his obvious wealth, and make an assumption about their relationship that he didn't correct. A hospital administrator appeared with a clipboard and a practiced, sympathetic expression. "Mr. Morrison, James Morrison." Recognition flickered across her face. Everyone in Buffalo's medical community knew that name. Morrison Tech Solutions had donated millions to this hospital. "Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss Mrs. Walsh's insurance situation before we can—" "I'm covering everything," James said flatly. He pulled out his American Express black card and handed it to her. "Everything. I don't care what it costs." The administrator's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, hypothermia treatment, possible kidney damage from prolonged exposure, malnutrition therapy. We're looking at $15,000 just for emergency stabilization, possibly more." Did I stutter? "Everything. Run the card. Do whatever needs to be done. If that card doesn't cover it, I'll wire transfer. If you need authorization, you have it. What you don't have is my patience for bureaucracy while a woman dies." The administrator nodded quickly and disappeared. Sophie tugged on James's sleeve. "Is Mommy going to die?" James knelt to her eye level. 25 years ago, Margaret had asked him a similar question from a hospital bed, and he'd lied. He'd said no, everything would be fine, because he couldn't face the truth. Margaret had known he was lying. It had hurt her more than honesty would have. He wouldn't make that mistake again. "I don't know, Sophie," he said quietly. "Your mom is very, very sick. The doctors are doing everything they can. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. But I promise you this, she won't die because someone decided not to help. Not while I'm here." Sophie nodded, processing this with the terrible wisdom of children who've been forced to grow up too fast. "Okay." Thomas, Robert, and William arrived 20 minutes later. William carried bags from a nearby store. Children's clothes, toiletries, books. Robert had a briefcase full of paperwork. Thomas just stood in the doorway, looking at Sophie with an expression James couldn't quite read. "I'll start researching Blackwell Industries," Robert said quietly, moving to stand beside James. "Something about this feels wrong. Good employees don't just get fired and end up homeless 3 months later. Not with severance, unemployment insurance, savings." "Dig deep," James said. "I want to know everything." William approached Sophie with a gentleness that surprised James. The CFO knelt down and showed her the bags. "I wasn't sure what size, so I got a few options. And there's hot chocolate in the cafeteria. Would you like some?" For the first time since James had met her, Sophie smiled. It was small and fragile, but it was there. "Can I have marshmallows?" "You can have as many marshmallows as you want." They settled into a waiting pattern. William took Sophie to the cafeteria. Thomas sat in a corner, hands folded, staring at nothing. Robert made phone calls, his lawyer voice clipped and efficient. James stood at the window overlooking the parking lot, watching snow fall on a city that suddenly seemed full of people he'd never seen before. How many Sophie Walshes were out there right now? How many Beth Walshes were slumped against trees, giving up inch by inch while people drove past? His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant about the meeting he'd missed. A conference call about the merger. The world of business continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. James looked at Sophie, now visible through the cafeteria window, carefully placing marshmallows in her hot chocolate one at a time. She was rationing them, he realized. Even now, even with abundance in front of her, she was rationing. He turned back to the ICU doors and made another promise. This wouldn't be the last person he helped. It would be the first. The first night was the longest. Beth Walsh remained unconscious, her body fighting battles invisible to those who waited. At 8:47 p.m., monitors began screaming. Nurses rushed in. A doctor shouted orders. The flatline sound, that terrible single note, lasted 8 seconds before Beth's heart remembered its purpose and started beating again. Sophie had been sleeping in James's arms when it happened. She woke at the commotion, her small body going rigid with terror. James held her, turned her face into his shoulder so she couldn't see the crash cart, the desperate activity through the ICU window. "Is Mommy—" Sophie couldn't finish the question. "They're helping her," James said, which was true, if incomplete. When the crisis passed and the doctor emerged, exhaustion lined every inch of her face. "She's stable again, but it was close. Her body is shutting down from prolonged starvation and exposure. We're doing everything we can, but the next 72 hours are critical." After the doctor left, Sophie squirmed out of James's arms and stood before him with a solemnity that seemed ancient. She reached into her worn sneaker and pulled out a small bundle of bills, all 20s carefully folded. "I have $200, she said. "Grandma gave it to me before the cancer took her. Mommy said it's for college. She said never, ever touch it, even if we're starving." Sophie's voice cracked. "But Mommy's dying. You can use this for the doctors. Please." James stared at the money in her small palm. $200. a child's entire future, wrapped in bills probably saved one at a time by a grandmother who'd never see that future realized. Beth Walsh had been dying with the solution literally in her daughter's shoe, and she'd refused to touch it. The magnitude of that sacrifice hit him like a freight train. "Sophie," he managed, his voice thick, "your mom is going to be okay. And that money, you keep that. Your grandmother wanted you to have dreams. Your mother almost died protecting those dreams. I'm not going to be the one who takes them from you. But, no buts. That's your future. Let me worry about today." He pulled her back into his arms and she cried, finally, fully cried, for what felt like hours. At 10:30 p.m., William returned with a sleeping bag, pillow, and a small mountain of children's books. "The nurses said we could set up a space for her in the pediatric wing. There's a spare room." But Sophie refused to leave the waiting area. "Mommy might wake up. She'll be scared if I'm not here." So they made a nest of blankets in the corner. Thomas produced a thermos of hot chocolate from somewhere. Robert draped his suit jacket over Sophie like a blanket. 4 men, collectively worth $500 million, sat on a hospital waiting room floor with a 6-year-old girl playing quiet card games and reading picture books in hushed voices. At 2 in the morning, James's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his son. "Sarah showed me a news alert. Buffalo CEO helps homeless woman. That you?" James stared at the message. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. And now this. He typed back, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Can I call you?" James looked at Sophie, finally asleep against his shoulder, then at Thomas, who nodded and carefully took the child into his own arms. James stepped into the hallway and accepted the call. "Dad?" Marcus's voice sounded older than James remembered. 28 now. A man, not the boy he'd last spoken to. "Marcus." Silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of unspoken words. "Why her?" Marcus finally asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. "Why this woman, this child, when you've driven past thousands of others?" James leaned against the cold hospital wall. "I don't know. I've been asking myself the same thing. Maybe because she was there. Maybe because Thomas's daughter died in that same spot. Maybe because—" He paused, throat tight. "Because she reminded me that I've been dead for 25 years, and I didn't even know it." "Mom's been gone that long," Marcus said quietly. "Yes. I always thought you threw yourself into work because of grief. But it wasn't grief, was it? It was fear." The observation landed with surgical precision. Fear of what? Of feeling anything again. Because if you felt, you might lose again. So you built walls made of money and called it success. James closed his eyes. "When did you get so smart?" "I had a lot of therapy, trying to understand why my father chose a corporation over a son." Marcus's voice held no bitterness now, just statement of fact. "The therapist said you were probably doing the best you could with tools you had. I didn't believe her then. But watching you on the news tonight, holding that little girl—" "Dad, I saw something in your face I haven't seen since Mom died. You looked alive." "I feel alive," James admitted. "It's terrifying." "Good. Terror means you're feeling something real." Marcus paused. "I'm coming to Buffalo tomorrow. I want to meet her. Sophie, if that's okay." "Why?" Because she did what I couldn't. She reminded you how to be human again. I need to thank her for that." After they hung up, James stood in the fluorescent hallway, processing the conversation. 25 years. He'd wasted 25 years being afraid of loss instead of grateful for presence. The next morning, Robert appeared with a file 6 inches thick. "You're not going to like this," Robert said, spreading documents across an unused reception desk. What James read made his blood boil. Blackwell Industries had fired 37 employees over the past 3 years. Every single termination occurred within weeks of major medical insurance claims. The documentation was sophisticated. Performance reviews that suddenly turned negative, write-ups for minor infractions that had been ignored for years, carefully constructed paper trails that made each firing appear legitimate. But the pattern was undeniable. "There's more," Robert said grimly. He pulled out a spreadsheet, clearly from internal company files. The header read, "Medical Liability Reduction Strategy." Column A, Employee Name. Column B, Annual Medical Claims. Column C, Termination Date. Column D, Projected Savings. Beth Walsh's row showed $12,847 in claims. Sophie's asthma medication and emergency room visits. Termination date, October 12th. Projected savings, $102,000 over 5 years. "It's systematic," Robert said. "This is company policy. Anyone whose medical claims exceed $10,000 annually gets targeted for termination. That can't be legal." "It's not, but it's carefully hidden. They use legitimate performance issues as cover. Most people don't have resources to fight it. They take severance, sign NDAs, and disappear into poverty." Robert pulled out another document. But Beth Walsh was smart. She recorded her termination meeting. He played the audio. Beth's voice, professional and steady. "Mr. Blackwell, I've received your termination notice. Can you explain what performance issues?" A male voice, cold and clipped. "Your performance has been declining for months, Mrs. Walsh. We have documented evidence." "I have excellent reviews from my supervisor. I don't understand. This decision is final. Your insurance terminates Friday. Security will escort you out." "Mr. Blackwell, please, my daughter has asthma. She needs her medication. I'm a single mother. Can you give me 2 weeks to find—" "Your daughter is not my responsibility. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Sign here." The sound of Beth crying. Then Blackwell's voice again, quieter but captured on the recording. "Compassion is expensive, Mrs. Walsh. I learned that the hard way. This company will not be held hostage by employees who can't manage their personal health issues." Robert stopped the playback. "There's 30 more minutes. She got everything." James felt something inside him snap. Not rage, not even anger, something colder and more focused. "Tell me about Richard Blackwell." Robert flipped through more documents. 52 years old, CEO and founder of Blackwell Industries. Mid-sized tech firm, 400 employees, net worth approximately $45 million. Reputation as an efficiency expert. Business magazines love him. He gives interviews about tough love and corporate culture and eliminating weakness from business models. Family? Divorced, no children, parents deceased, 1 sibling, younger brother David Blackwell, died 2015, age 38. Overdose. James's instincts prickled. Instincts. "Tell me about the brother." Robert pulled out newspaper clippings. David struggled with addiction most of his adult life. In and out of rehab. There's an interview Richard gave to a business journal in 2016, year after David died. Want to hear it? James nodded. Robert read, "My brother taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. You cannot save people from themselves. I tried everything, paid for rehab 4 times, gave him money, gave him chances. He chose drugs every time. When he died, I realized I'd been enabling his weakness. That was my mistake. True compassion means letting people face the consequences of their choices. In business and in life, weakness must be allowed to fail. That's not cruelty. That's natural selection. The room fell silent. He turned his brother's death into a business philosophy, James said quietly. Worse, William interjected, entering with his own stack of files. He's been embezzling through a fake charity. William spread out financial records. Blackwell established the Blackwell Family Foundation 5 years ago. Claims to donate millions to various causes. Tax write-offs to match. But look at where the money actually goes. James examined the bank records. $2 million annually claimed as donations. 50,000 actually donated, mostly to arts organizations where Blackwell sat on boards. The rest? Administrative costs, which meant Blackwell's own salary as foundation director. It's technically legal, William said. Barely. But morally, he's stealing from people who need help, to fund a lifestyle built on the appearance of generosity. James stood and walked to the window. In the parking lot below, he could see people coming and going, some in professional clothes heading to work in the hospital, some in worn coats that had seen too many winters, visiting sick relatives they probably couldn't afford to treat. How many of them were one medical crisis away from Sophie's corner? How many were being crushed by systems designed to look legal while functioning as death sentences? And how many of those systems bore James's fingerprints? Robert, he said quietly, pull Morrison Capital's investment records, specifically anything involving Blackwell Industries. Already did. Robert's voice was grim. You're not going to like it. The documents told a story James didn't want to read, but couldn't look away from. 10 years ago, Morrison Capital, James's venture fund, had provided $15 million in Series B funding to Blackwell Industries. James sat on the board as a passive investor. He'd attended maybe 3 meetings in 10 years, signing off on whatever was presented without real scrutiny. 8 years ago, Blackwell had presented operational efficiency improvements to the board. James had signed the approval. He'd been in Hawaii at the time, phoning in, barely paying attention. Those efficiency improvements were the medical claims termination policy. James's signature was on the document that had destroyed Beth Walsh's life, and 36 others. Oh, God, James breathed. You didn't know, Robert said quickly. I didn't ask. James turned to face them, and for the first time in decades, let them see him break. I had the power to know, the responsibility to know. I chose not to because knowing might have complicated my returns. He laughed bitterly. That $15 million is worth $45 million now. I've tripled my money on the backs of people like Beth Walsh. Thomas spoke for the first time in hours, his voice gravelly with age and sorrow. So, what are you going to do about it? James looked through the window toward the ICU where Beth Walsh fought for her life, toward the waiting room where Sophie slept, clutching $200 that represented her only future. I'm going to burn it down, he said quietly. All of it. Not Blackwell Industries. The employees need those jobs, but Blackwell himself, his reputation, his philosophy, his theft. Everything. How? William asked. James pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. Catherine Mills, Buffalo News. Ms. Mills, this is James Morrison. I understand you've been investigating Richard Blackwell. I have information you're going to want, and I have victims willing to talk. But first, I have a question. How would you like to break the biggest corporate scandal Buffalo's seen in 20 years? 5 days after finding Sophie on that frozen corner, James Morrison walked into Blackwell Tower with an army at his back. Not soldiers. Something more powerful. Truth. Marcus had arrived from Seattle 2 days prior, and the reunion between father and son had been awkward, painful, and necessary. They'd sat in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m, Sophie asleep upstairs, and said things that should have been said years ago. "I was a terrible father," James had started. "You were a present father who was absent," Marcus corrected, "which was somehow worse than just leaving. I don't know how to fix 28 years. You don't. You just start today and keep going." Now Marcus walked beside him, having taken emergency leave from his job in Seattle. Thomas drove, as always, but today he'd asked to come inside. Robert carried the briefcase containing enough evidence to destroy a man's life. William had the financial records that proved systematic theft. And Sophie sat in the back seat, wearing her new red coat, holding a folder of photographs. Beth had regained consciousness the previous evening. Weak, hoarse, but alive. When James had asked permission to confront Blackwell, to bring Sophie as living evidence of his cruelty, Beth had wept. "Will it help the others?" she'd rasped. "Yes." "Then go. But promise me something. Anything. Don't let her see violence. Don't let her learn that power means cruelty. Show her that power can mean justice." James had promised. Blackwell Tower rose 15 stories, all glass and steel and chrome. The lobby was marble and cold light, designed to intimidate. The receptionist, young, professional, terrified of making mistakes, stood as they entered. "Mr. Morrison, we weren't expecting—" "Tell Mr. Blackwell that James Morrison is here to see him. He'll want this meeting." "He's in conference. He'll want this meeting," James repeated, his voice carrying the weight of $400 million and absolute certainty. The receptionist picked up her phone with shaking hands. 3 minutes later, they were ascending to the 15th floor. Sophie pressed against James's side in the elevator, her small hand gripping his. "I'm scared," she whispered. James knelt to her level. "Me too. But sometimes being brave means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You don't have to say anything. You just have to be there. Can you do that?" Sophie nodded, then said something that nearly broke him. "Mommy says I'm the bravest person she knows, because I asked for help. She says asking for help is braver than pretending you're okay." The elevator doors opened. Blackwell's office occupied the entire 15th floor. Glass walls provided a panoramic view of Buffalo. The city spread below like a kingdom. Richard Blackwell stood at those windows, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man who believed himself untouchable. He turned as they entered, 52 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that photographed well for magazine covers, handsome in the way of men who've never missed a meal or worried about a bill. His practiced smile appeared. "James Morrison. This is unexpected." He extended his hand. James didn't take it. Instead, he placed Sophie's cardboard sign on Blackwell's pristine glass desk. The sign still bore traces of snow damage. The words written in what James now knew was Beth's last lipstick, red, carefully applied to cardboard, with a mother's desperate precision. "For sale. $20. Please help, Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days. Blackwell's smile faltered. His eyes moved from the sign to Sophie, recognition flickering across his face. I don't understand. This, James said quietly, is Sophie Walsh. Her mother, Elizabeth Walsh, worked for you until October 12th. You fired her. Do you remember? I don't recall every employee. Robert stepped forward and placed a small speaker on the desk. He pressed play. Beth's voice filled the office, professional and steady. Mr. Blackwell, I've received your termination notice. Can you explain what performance issues? Blackwell's recorded voice. Your performance has been declining for months. Beth, I have excellent reviews. Blackwell, this decision is final. Your insurance terminates Friday. Beth, please, my daughter has asthma. She needs her medication. I'm a single mother. Blackwell, your daughter is not my responsibility. The recording played for 30 seconds. Long enough. Robert stopped it. Recognize the conversation now? James asked. Blackwell's face had paled. That was a private meeting. That was a woman begging you not to kill her daughter and you calling compassion a liability. James placed the photographs on the desk, one by one. This is Beth Walsh in the ICU, hypothermic, hours from death. This is Sophie in her old coat, selling her bicycle, her only possession, for $20 to buy food. This is the abandoned house where they were living after you fired her. No heat, no water. And this, he placed the final photo. This is Beth's cut-up wedding dress, which she'd sewn into a blanket because she had nothing else. Sophie climbed onto the chair opposite Blackwell without being asked. She was so small that sitting, she barely reached desk height. She placed her training wheels on the glass surface, pink plastic, scratched from the bicycle James now knew had been Sophie's grandmother's final gift before cancer took her. Then Sophie placed the $200, those carefully folded 20s, beside the wheels. She said nothing, just stared at Blackwell with eyes that had seen too much. William opened his briefcase. 37 employees terminated in 3 years, all within weeks of major medical claims, all documented here. He spread the spreadsheets across the desk. Your medical liability reduction strategy. My favorite part is column D, projected savings. You calculated profit margins on human suffering. Robert added his documents to the growing pile. And then there's the Blackwell Family Foundation. $2 million annually claimed as charitable donations. 50,000 actually donated. 1.95 million in administrative costs, which is to say, your pocket. Blackwell's hands were shaking now. You can't prove. We have bank records, William said. We have IRS filings. We have testimony from 12 victims willing to go public. And we have Catherine Mills from the Buffalo News outside in the lobby with a camera crew waiting for us to finish this conversation. This is extortion. No, James said, his voice dropping to something cold and final. This is accountability. Here's what's going to happen, Richard. You're going to reinstate Elizabeth Walsh and every person you fired under this policy, with back pay, with benefits, with formal apologies. I will not. You will. Because if you don't, I will buy this company. Morrison Capital owns 15%. I've contacted your other major shareholders. They're very interested in selling after learning about your practices. I can have controlling interest by Monday, and then you'll have nothing. Blackwell's jaw clenched. You can't. I can. I have $400 million and a very good lawyer. You have $45 million and a company built on cruelty. Math isn't in your favor. James leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. But here's what really matters, Richard. I know about David. Blackwell went completely still. Your brother, James continued softly, died 2015. Overdose. You refused to help him. Called it enabling. Told him to face consequences. He called you 3 days before he died, begging for rehab money, and you said no. Stay out of my family. You made it my business when you turned your grief into policy, James said. You couldn't save David, so you decided nobody deserved saving. You weaponized your guilt. Every person you fired, you were killing your brother again, telling yourself this time you were right to say no. Blackwell's face crumpled. 25 years of repressed grief, breaking through polished surfaces. Sophie spoke then, her voice small but clear in the enormous office. My daddy died too. Mommy told me he left, but I know now he died working for you. You covered it up. Blackwell's eyes widened. What? Robert placed another document on the desk. Daniel Walsh. Workplace accident 2018. You paid the family $50,000 and forced Beth to sign an NDA. You never admitted fault. That was settled. With hush money and threats, Robert said. We have testimony, we have medical records, we have truth. My mommy didn't let me use my college money even when we were starving, Sophie continued. She touched the $200 on the desk. She said dreams are the only thing poor people have that rich people can't buy. Your brother asked you for help. You said no. My mommy could have said no to keeping my dreams, but she said yes, even when saying yes meant dying. She looked directly at Blackwell. Are you sad that your brother died? Or are you angry that he made you feel sad? The question, asked in a 6-year-old's voice, landed with devastating precision. Blackwell's breath came ragged. His hands gripped the desk edge. I tried to help him. 4 rehabs. I gave everything. You gave money, Sophie said. Did you give love? Silence filled the office like water filling lungs. Then Blackwell broke. Not gracefully, not cinematically. He simply collapsed into his chair and wept, ugly, choking sobs that sounded like they'd been trapped for a decade. I couldn't save him, Blackwell gasped. I tried everything, and I couldn't save him, and everyone said I did my best, but I didn't. I gave up. I told him no, and 3 days later he was dead. And I've spent 10 years telling myself I was right to let him die, because if I was wrong, then I'm a murderer. I killed my brother. Marcus, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. He placed a hand on Blackwell's shoulder. My father spent 25 years choosing money over me because the woman he loved died, and he couldn't face grief. You're not special. You're just broken. Like everyone. Blackwell looked up at Marcus, then at James, then at Sophie. What do you want from me? I want you to get help, James said. Real help. Therapy. Grief counseling. I want you to stop punishing the world for your brother's death, and I want you to restore what you destroyed. And if I refuse, then I destroy you instead. Your choice. Blackwell stared at the cardboard sign, at Sophie's training wheels, at the $200 a mother wouldn't touch even while dying. I'll sign everything, he whispered. I'll reinstate everyone. I need help. God, I need help. James nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said. He lifted Sophie from the chair. As they turned to leave, Blackwell's voice stopped them. Mr. Morrison, how did you know about making grief into cruelty? James looked back. Because I did the same thing. I just got lucky enough to meet someone who reminded me how to be human before it was too late." He touched Sophie's head gently. "Her name is Sophie Walsh. Remember it, because she saved both our lives." The news broke that evening. Catherine Mills's story ran on the front page of the Buffalo News with a headline that would be repeated across the country: "The $20 sign that exposed corporate cruelty." By morning, it had gone viral. 2 million shares in 24 hours. CNN, NBC, Fox, networks that rarely agreed on anything, all covered it with the same horrified fascination. The photograph that accompanied every article showed Sophie's cardboard sign, the words written in lipstick now iconic. James watched the coverage from Beth's hospital room, where she'd been moved from ICU to a recovery ward. She was sitting up now, color returning to her face, though she remained heartbreakingly thin. Sophie sat on the bed beside her, finally reunited with her mother, refusing to let go of Beth's hand. Beth watched the television in silence as Richard Blackwell's carefully constructed reputation crumbled in real time. Stock prices, board meetings, victims coming forward with their stories. Then she turned to James. "How long? How long what? How long until the next shoe drops?" Her voice was still hoarse but steady. "Nothing's ever this clean. There's always a catch." James opened his mouth to reassure her, then stopped. Beth Walsh had survived 3 months of hell. She deserved truth, not comfort. "There might be," he admitted. "The doctors want to run more tests. The hypothermia, it caused damage. They're not sure yet how extensive." Beth's hand tightened on Sophie's. "What kind of damage?" Dr. Patricia Chen entered then, as if summoned by the question. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to believe in gentle lies. "Mrs. Walsh, I need to speak with you about your test results." Sophie looked up. "Should I leave?" "No," Beth said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my daughter. She's already lived through the worst. She deserves to hear the truth." Dr. Chen nodded and pulled up a chair. "The prolonged hypothermia caused more damage than we initially realized. Your kidneys, they were already stressed from dehydration and malnutrition. The extreme cold pushed them into acute failure. Right now, they're functioning at approximately 30% capacity." The words hung in the air like a death sentence deferred. "What does that mean?" Sophie asked. "It means your mother will need help cleaning her blood. There are 2 options. Dialysis, which is a machine that does the work her kidneys can't do, 3 times a week for the rest of her life, or a transplant, which would give her a new kidney." "How much does dialysis cost?" Beth asked. She already knew. James could see it in her eyes. "Approximately $90,000 annually." Beth laughed, a broken, bitter sound. Of course it does." "I'll cover it," James said immediately. "No." Beth's voice was flat, final. "You've done enough." "It's not enough until you're well." "I won't be your charity case." Beth's eyes blazed with something fierce and desperate. "I won't be the poor woman you saved. I won't be your second chance to fix the wife you couldn't save. I won't be your redemption, Mr. Morrison." The words hit James like physical blows. Sophie's face crumpled, not understanding the medical details, but understanding the tone her mother and the man who'd saved them were fighting. "You're not charity," James said quietly. "You're what? What am I to you? A tax write-off? A feel-good story? The woman who makes you look like a hero?" James stood, anger flashing through him. "You're the woman who taught her daughter that dreams are worth dying for. You're the woman who cut up her wedding dress rather than touch her child's future. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and you're too proud to accept help even when that pride might kill you. Better to die with dignity than live as someone's pet project." "Mommy, stop!" Sophie was crying now, small hands clutching Beth's hospital gown. "Please stop!" The room fell silent except for Sophie's sobs. Beth pulled her daughter close, her own tears falling. "Baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." James moved toward the door, needing distance before he said something unforgivable. But Thomas blocked his path, the elderly chauffeur placing a firm hand on James's chest. "Sit down," Thomas said. Not a request. An order. James sat. Thomas turned to Beth. "Mrs. Walsh, may I tell you about my daughter?" Beth nodded, still holding Sophie. "Her name was Catherine. She died 3 years ago. Hypothermia. She'd been living in her car after losing her job. I didn't know. I was driving rich men around Buffalo while my own daughter froze to death 10 miles away." Thomas's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "I found out at her funeral, and I've spent 3 years asking myself, why didn't she call me? Why didn't she ask for help?" He sat on the edge of Beth's bed. "Her friend told me. Catherine said she didn't want to be a burden, didn't want her failure to become my problem. She'd rather die than admit she needed her father." Thomas looked directly at Beth. "Your pride didn't keep you warm in that park. It nearly killed you. And if Sophie hadn't been brave enough to ask for help, to stand on that corner with a sign, which must have been the hardest thing she's ever done, you'd both be dead." "I'm not comparing suffering," Thomas continued, "but I am saying this. Accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And teaching your daughter that asking for help is shameful? That's the cruelest thing you could do to her." Sophie's small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, you said asking for help was brave. You said that's why you sent me with the bike. But now, you won't let Mr. James help you?" Beth closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of needing help. I'm tired of being the woman whose husband died and whose job disappeared and whose daughter had to sell her toys to eat. I'm tired of being a tragedy. I just want to be enough. I want to be enough on my own." James stood and approached the bed slowly, as if approaching something wild and wounded. He knelt beside it, eye level with Beth. "When my wife Margaret died, I told myself I'd never let money be why someone suffered again. But what I really did was build walls. I made money so I wouldn't have to feel. I cut off my son because he reminded me that wealth can't buy back what you've lost. I drove past suffering every day, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging my own pain." He reached out, stopped just short of touching Beth's hand, waiting for permission. She didn't pull away. Sophie standing on that corner with a $20 sign? That cracked something in me I'd kept frozen for 25 years. "You didn't ask to be my second chance, but you became it anyway. Not because you're my charity case or my redemption project, because you're the evidence that it's not too late, that walls can come down, that frozen hearts can thaw." James's voice broke. "I'm not asking to be your savior. I'm asking to be your friend. And friends help each other. Please, let me help." Beth's hand finally moved, covering his. "I don't know how to be helpless." "You're not helpless. You're human. There's a difference." Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently. "For what it's worth, I'd like to offer something. I can test for kidney compatibility. A living donor transplant is possible if we find a match. It's a long shot, but test me, James said immediately. And me, Thomas added. Me too, came Robert's voice from the doorway. William stood beside him. All of us. Marcus pushed through. I'm O negative. Universal donor. Test me first. Beth stared at the 5 men crowding into her hospital room, all volunteering to be cut open for a woman they'd known less than a week. Why? She whispered. Why would you all? Because you're worth saving, Marcus said simply. And because my father forgot that for 25 years, and you reminded him. That makes you family. Sophie tugged on her mother's hospital gown. Mommy, please. Please let them help. I don't want you to die because you're too proud. Pride is stupid if it kills you. The child's words, so painfully direct, finally broke through. Beth nodded, then collapsed into sobs. Real sobs, not the controlled crying she'd allowed herself before. James moved onto the bed beside her, and she leaned into him, this woman who'd tried to hold the world together alone, finally allowing herself to fall apart in front of witnesses. Sophie crawled between them, and the 3 of them sat there, broken people beginning to heal, while 5 men quietly left to get tested for compatibility. Outside the window, snow began to fall again. But inside the room, something warmer than winter had arrived. The compatibility results came back 48 hours later. Dr. Chen gathered everyone in a private consultation room. James, Thomas, Robert, William, Marcus, Beth, and Sophie. I'll be direct, Dr. Chen said. None of you are compatible matches. The disappointment was immediate and crushing. James had been so certain. Marcus had the right blood type. Surely one of them. However, Dr. Chen continued, there is another option. Mrs. Walsh, your husband Daniel, was an organ donor. Is that correct? Beth's face went pale. Yes. When he died, they said his organs would help people. But there was some issue with matching and... Her voice caught. Why are you asking? Dr. Chen opened a file. Daniel Walsh's kidneys were harvested and cryopreserved in 2018. They never found a suitable recipient on the transplant list. Standard protocol is to keep organs preserved for up to 10 years in case a match emerges. The room fell absolutely silent. Are you saying... Beth couldn't finish. I'm saying your husband's kidneys are still viable, and as his spouse, you're likely to be highly compatible. We ran preliminary tests against your tissue type. It's a 92% match. Sophie looked up at her mother, confusion and hope warring on her small face. Daddy can save you? But Daddy's in heaven. A part of him has been waiting, Dr. Chen said gently, waiting for 6 years to help someone, and that someone is your mother. Beth pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming. He's been here all this time, still protecting us. James felt the weight of it, the cosmic poetry of the man Blackwell had killed, becoming the man who would save Beth from Blackwell's cruelty. If he believed in God, this would be the moment that proved divine intervention. If he believed in justice, this would be the moment it revealed itself as more than a concept. But what he believed in was this. Sometimes the universe bent toward redemption, and you didn't question it. You just accepted the grace. When can we do the surgery? Beth asked. We need to run more detailed compatibility tests. But if everything checks out, we could schedule for January 25th, 3 days from now. 3 days. Sophie would get her mother back. Daniel Walsh would save his wife one final time. And James, James would learn that some rescues didn't require his money at all, that some solutions existed outside his control, humbling and perfect. "There's something else," Beth said quietly. She pulled out her phone, the cracked screen that had recorded Blackwell's cruelty, and handed it to Robert. "I need you to listen to the full recording, all 43 minutes. There's something near the end." Robert connected the phone to a speaker. They'd all heard the beginning, Beth's termination, Blackwell's coldness. But Beth fast-forwarded to minute 38. Blackwell's voice, quieter now, talking to someone else in the room. "How many is that this quarter?" A woman's voice. "Walsh makes 12, sir." "Good. Medical claims are down 37%. Board will be pleased. Oh, and remind me to send flowers to Walsh's home. You know, the tasteful, sorry for your loss arrangement. Make sure there's a card about how the company values all employees." Laughter. Two people laughing about firing a woman whose husband had died in their workplace. The recording continued. Blackwell. "Has she signed the NDA about her husband's accident?" Woman. "Yes, sir. 50,000 seemed to be sufficient." "Excellent. Can't have her talking about the safety violations that killed him. Would be terrible PR." The recording ended. The silence in the room was suffocating. "Safety violations," Robert said slowly. "Daniel Walsh didn't die in an accident. He died because of negligence. And Blackwell paid hush money." Beth nodded, her face carved from stone. "I signed that NDA because I had a 6-month-old baby and no income. I signed it because I was terrified and alone, and he promised me it was standard procedure. I signed away my right to sue for wrongful death for $50,000. "NDAs signed under duress aren't legally binding," Robert said immediately, "especially when they're covering up criminal negligence. Beth, you could—" "I don't want money," Beth interrupted. "I want justice, not for me. For Daniel. For our daughter who grew up without a father because Richard Blackwell decided profits mattered more than safety protocols." James stood and walked to the window. Outside, Buffalo was going about its business, people working, living, dying, all of it continuing regardless of individual tragedies. But individual tragedies could become collective awakening if you told the story right, if you gave voice to the voiceless. "Catherine Mills," James said. "We need to give her this recording, all of it. Not just the termination, the part about Daniel's death, the part about the cover-up." "It'll destroy him," William said, not objecting, just stating fact. "He destroyed himself," Beth said. "I'm just making sure everyone knows it." The story broke the next morning. Catherine Mills's follow-up article carried a headline that would end Richard Blackwell's career. CEO covered up fatal workplace accident, fired victim's widow. The audio recording played on every news station. The laughter, that casual, cruel laughter about flowers and $50,000 and silencing a grieving widow, became the soundbite that defined corporate sociopathy for a generation. By noon, Blackwell Industries Board had called an emergency meeting. By 3 p.m., Richard Blackwell had been voted out as CEO. By evening, criminal charges were being filed, not just civil wrongful death suits, but criminal negligence resulting in death. Blackwell released a statement that his lawyers had clearly written, but that his broken voice delivered. "I have spent 10 years becoming the man my brother's death convinced me I should be. That man was a monster. I am entering intensive therapy and psychiatric care. I am establishing a foundation in my brother David's name to fund addiction treatment. And I am setting aside $15 million, my entire personal fortune, to create a victim compensation fund for every person my policies harmed. This includes a full scholarship fund for Sophie Walsh, whose father I killed, and whose mother I tried to destroy. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only for the chance to spend the rest of my life trying to repair what I broke." The statement went viral for different reasons than the first story. People debated whether redemption was possible, whether accountability required forgiveness, whether a monster who acknowledged his monstrosity deserved a second chance. James watched the debates with something like recognition. He'd asked himself the same questions about his own life. The answer, he'd decided, wasn't about deserving. It was about doing. Blackwell would spend the rest of his life proving whether his remorse was real. Just like James would spend the rest of his proving he could be more than the hollow millionaire who'd driven past suffering. On January 24th, the evening before Beth's surgery, they gathered in her hospital room. Not for a party. Beth was too weak, too anxious about the next day. But for something quieter. Sophie had drawn a picture. It showed stick figures. Mommy, Sophie, and Mr. James. Behind them, a taller stick figure with wings. "Daddy watching," Sophie had labeled it. Beth taped it to the wall beside her bed. "I want to say something," Beth said. Everyone quieted. "James, when you found us, I was ready to die. I'd given up. I'd sent my daughter away so she wouldn't watch me freeze because I couldn't face watching her starve. I'd decided that dying with what little dignity I had left was better than living as someone's burden." She looked at Sophie, then at James. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me that being saved isn't shameful, that asking for help is wisdom, that community isn't weakness." Her voice broke. "Tomorrow my husband, the man I loved and lost, will save me one more time, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Sophie knows that love doesn't end. It transforms. It waits. It returns in ways we never expect." James found his voice thick. "Margaret, my wife, she told me not to let money make me cold. I spent 25 years doing exactly that, building walls of wealth around a frozen heart. You didn't tear those walls down, Beth. Sophie did. With a $20 sign and training wheels and $200 she wouldn't spend even while dying." He looked at Sophie. "You taught me that being rich means nothing if you can't see the people around you. That stopping, just stopping and looking, is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do." Sophie, sitting between her mother and James, took both their hands. "Tomorrow, Daddy saves Mommy," she said with a child's absolute certainty. "And then we all get to be a family, right?" "Right," Beth whispered. "Right," James agreed. Outside, snow fell on Buffalo, the same snow that had nearly killed Beth Walsh, now just weather, beautiful and cold and temporary. Inside, warmth had taken root. Tomorrow would bring surgery, risk, fear. But tonight, they had each other. And sometimes, that was enough. The surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m. on January 25th. Beth was prepped at 6, moved to pre-op at 7. Sophie was allowed to see her mother one final time before the anesthesia. "I'll see you when you wake up," Sophie said, trying to be brave. Her small hands clutched her mother's. "You'll see me when I wake up," Beth promised. "And Daddy will be there too. A part of him, keeping me safe. Tell him I miss him." "I will, baby. I will." They wheeled Beth away, and Sophie collapsed into James's arms, finally letting herself cry. He carried her to the surgical waiting room where their assembled family gathered. Thomas, Robert, William, Marcus, the 5 men who'd become something more than employees or acquaintances. They'd become witnesses to transformation. The surgery was expected to take 4 to 6 hours. They settled in for the wait. At hour 1, Sophie colored in a notebook Marcus had brought. She drew pictures of her mother, healthy and smiling. At hour 2, lunch was offered, but nobody ate. William paced. Robert made phone calls about the Blackwell litigation. Thomas sat with his eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been prayer. At hour 3, Sophie fell asleep on James's lap, exhausted from days of emotional upheaval. At hour 4, Marcus sat beside his father. "You've changed," he said quietly. "I had to," James replied. "I was dying. I just didn't know it until a 6-year-old showed me what life looked like." "Think it'll last? The change?" James looked at Sophie sleeping against him, at the men who'd reorganized their lives around this crisis, at the empty chair where Beth should be sitting. "I think change is like Sophie's bicycle. You start with training wheels, support, help, people keeping you upright. Eventually you learn to balance on your own, but you never forget who taught you to ride." At hour 5, Dr. Chen emerged. Still in surgical scrubs, mask pulled down, exhaustion evident, but eyes clear. Everyone stood. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Chen said, and the relief was audible. Exhaled breaths, muttered thanks. Thomas's quiet, "Lord be praised." The kidney, Daniel's kidney, accepted immediately. Function is already at 70% and rising. We expect full integration within weeks. Barring complications, Beth will make a complete recovery. Sophie woke at the commotion. "Mommy's okay?" "Your mommy's going to be just fine," Dr. Chen said, kneeling to Sophie's level. "And your daddy helped save her, just like you knew he would." Sophie burst into tears, not sad tears, but the kind of crying that comes when tension finally releases. James held her while she sobbed, while everyone in that waiting room let themselves feel the full weight of what had almost been lost and what had been miraculously saved. 3 weeks later, Beth was discharged from the hospital. She walked out under her own power, 50 pounds lighter than she'd been before the crisis, but gaining weight daily. Her kidney function had stabilized at 85%, not perfect, but enough. More than enough. James had bought a house, 4 bedrooms, in a safe neighborhood near Sophie's school. Not a mansion. That life was behind him. He'd sold the 13-bedroom monument to loneliness and converted it into a homeless shelter. The irony wasn't lost on him. The house he'd bought to avoid feeling anything now housed 40 people trying to survive what he'd once ignored. The new house had Beth and Sophie's names on the deed, not as a gift. James had learned that lesson. As rent to own. Beth would pay what she could afford from her new job at Morrison Tech Solutions, where she worked as senior data analyst. Not charity. She was brilliant, and the company needed her skills, but it was understood, unspoken, that family helped family. And they were family now. On February 15th, they had Sophie's 7th birthday party. The first party with friends from school, the first party where cake and presents didn't represent impossible luxuries. Beth cried watching her daughter blow out candles, surrounded by classmates and normalcy, and the simple joy of childhood restored. James gave Sophie a present that made Beth cry harder, the cardboard sign professionally framed with a plaque beneath it reading, "Sophie Walsh, age 6, the bravest person I know." "So you never forget how strong you are," James said. "And so I never forget how close I came to driving past the most important moment of my life." By March, routines had formed. James visited for dinner every Thursday. Marcus had moved back to Buffalo, taking a position at Morrison Tech, slowly rebuilding the relationship with his father through shared purpose rather than shared blood. Thomas had officially retired, but came by weekly to take Sophie to the park. Never the corner where they'd found her, but other parks, safer parks, where children played without desperation. The Blackwell Foundation launched in April, funded by Richard Blackwell's entire personal fortune. David Blackwell Memorial Fund for addiction treatment and workplace safety advocacy. Blackwell himself remained in intensive psychiatric care, but early reports suggested genuine transformation. Whether that transformation would last, whether redemption was possible for someone who'd caused such harm, those questions remained open. But the fund helped people. 400 individuals received addiction treatment in the first month. Workplace safety regulations were strengthened, and Sophie's college fund, promised in Blackwell's statement, now sat at $800,000, enough for any future she chose. Beth had begun dating again, carefully, slowly, but with the kind of openness that suggested healing. She spoke of Daniel often, with love rather than pain, teaching Sophie that grief and joy could coexist. "Your father would be proud of you," Beth told Sophie one evening, looking at a photo of Daniel holding infant Sophie. "He'd be proud of how brave you were, how you asked for help when I couldn't." "Do you think he knows?" Sophie asked. "In heaven? I think he knows. I think he's been watching over us the whole time. And I think he sent Mr. James to find us." 1 year later, on January 15th, they returned to the corner where it had all begun. Not just James, Beth, and Sophie, but dozens of others. The 37 employees Blackwell had fired and James had rehired, their families, people from the shelter James had founded, journalists, advocates, and strangers who'd followed the story. Sophie's pink bicycle was there, restored and mounted on a permanent memorial. A plaque read, "In memory of those still freezing, in honor of those who stop, in celebration of those who ask for help and those who answer. January 15th, 2025, the day we remembered how to see each other." Sophie placed flowers at the base. Beth stood beside her, healthy and strong, Daniel's kidney functioning perfectly. James stood on Beth's other side, his hand resting on her shoulder. Not possessive, not romantic, but familial. A homeless man approached the gathered crowd, hesitant, cold, hungry, desperate. He held a cardboard sign, "Please help." James didn't hesitate. He walked to the man, looked him in the eyes, really looked, really saw, and said, "What's your name?" "Marcus," the man said. "My name is Marcus." James smiled. "Marcus, that's my son's name. It's a good name. Marcus, let's get you somewhere warm. Let's get you help. And let's get you seen." He turned back to the crowd, to Beth and Sophie, and the family he'd found in the wreckage of his frozen life. "This is what we do now," James said. "We stop, we see, we help. Because Sophie taught us that wealth isn't what you have. It's who you see." Sophie took his hand, took her mother's hand. "And who you love," Sophie added. "And who you love," James agreed. The snow fell gently on Buffalo, no longer a threat, but a reminder of cold that had been survived, of warmth that had been found, of hearts that had thawed when everything seemed frozen beyond repair. They walked together toward the waiting cars, toward homes that were filled rather than empty, toward lives that had been rewritten by a 6-year-old girl with a $20 sign and the courage to ask for help. Behind them, the memorial stood in the snow, the pink bicycle gleaming, the plaque reflecting light, and carved into the stone, visible to everyone who passed, one final line. Sometimes all it takes is stopping. If you've ever driven past someone in need and felt that small pull in your chest, that whisper saying stop, you know the feeling James Morrison ignored for 25 years. We build walls around our hearts, don't we? We call it success, independence, moving forward. But sometimes those walls become prisons. Beth Walsh nearly died with $200 in her daughter's shoe because pride told her asking for help meant failure. James Morrison had $400 million and 13 empty bedrooms because grief told him feeling anything meant losing again. And little Sophie? She stood on a frozen corner with a cardboard sign because she understood something we forget as we grow older. Being human means needing each other. This story isn't about wealth or poverty. It's about the moment we choose to see each other again. To stop building walls and start building families, not from blood but from shared humanity, from showing up, from saying, I see you, to someone the world has made invisible. What moment made you stop and truly see someone? Have you ever been the person holding the sign or the person who drove past? Share your story in the comments below, because every story of connection reminds us we're not alone.